quorum.
Okay, thank you. The agenda has been circulated by email. Today's agenda has been circulated by email. Is there a motion concerning the minutes of our last meeting, September 9th? Are there any corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, the minutes will be accepted.
Mr. Chairman, we do need a motion in a second and a roll call on that.
Yes, why not?
Because we are virtual and that's what we got to do.
I so move.
Thank you. Second,
Second.
okay, Ms. Saltmarsh.
All right.
I'm off mute.
I can't hear you, so I can't hear anything that's going on. If anybody's saying anything to me,
Oh, okay.
I think I did.
Let me let you know that we
Come out and come back on.
okay. Okay, roll call on the minutes. Kelly Cassidy,
Yes.
Joby Cates,
Yes.
Mitch Davis,
Yes.
Jacob Delaney,
Yes.
Latoya Hughes,
Yes.
Cheryl Ingram,
Yes.
Ari Jones. Ari,
Yes.
Jova Mahadev,
Yes.
Scott Main,
Yes.
Robert Peters. Oops, he's not here. Sorry. Mark Salone.
Yes.
Okay. Unanimous.
Okay, the minutes are approved. At this point, we'll preview our agenda. Ms. Lloyd, please. Ms. Lloyd,
You're
He's
on mute. You're on mute.
This morning, we have a pretty straightforward agenda. We're going to debrief yesterday's public hearing, calling on the task force members who were present to do that, and then have a brief conversation about the editing process and the final report. Back to you, Mark.
thank you. First, let me note that Representative Cassidy did a great job running the meeting on yesterday.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Was great. I thought the remarks were enlightening. And I just hope that more people will view yesterday's session. I understand it's available on YouTube. But let me open the floor to the members of the committee for their impressions of yesterday's session. Anyone care to start?
I guess I'll jump in.
Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely. In many ways, and if Robert were here, I think he would probably concur, since the passage of 2129, a week does not pass without hearing from a family member or an inmate or a friend who is trying to figure out how to take advantage of this resource and becoming frustrated by dead ends. And in many cases, just not even getting any responses out of the county state's attorneys, which, is a very dehumanizing feeling. And it's clear from their testimony that there's frustration in that. And so for nothing else, I'm really grateful that we gave folks who haven't had an outlet, because that was clearly a need. It was interesting to hear some of their perspectives. In fact, one person, and I don't remember which person, I think it was one of the parents though, who talked about that the person's mental health should be a consideration. And I don't know that we had ever really contemplated that in factors. So that was kind of my biggest takeaway was, had we ever discussed that, whether it was someone's mental health at the time of sentencing or what's happened to their mental health while they're in? I think those are That's an interesting component. I think it was a parent of someone who went in with some pretty significant mental illness and is now much, much, much worse than he was when he went in.
Yeah, is it my out of turn? I'm sorry. I'll raise my hand. Unless,
Oh, Kathy, you wanna-
Joby, go ahead. And I would be really grateful in terms of writing the report if you could also kind of identify one or two takeaways, as well as giving us your overall impression and your thoughts on how to incorporate the wisdom that we heard yesterday into our report. So take it away, Joby.
yeah, I first of all, Kathy and Rep Cassidy and Chairman, I want to thank the three of you for doing, and Chairman Salone, I'm not sure if you know what it meant to the people who were watching to see you as someone who had the office of judge and who, with all of the dignity and respect that comes with that position, heard them. You heard them. And Representative Cassidy, I want to say that your clear and consistent willingness to note the details of these people's lives, even if you can't do anything about it, which sometimes I know you can't, even if you want to and you try. Being asked what county you're in matters to these folks. So, and Kathy, the way in which you ran the meeting and your follow-up, the work that you're doing to make sure the men at Kewanee receive verification that their letters were received and that you're putting some notes in their newsletter. I don't think any of us could sort of know, with the exception of Mr. Delaney and Mr. Mayorga, if they're on the call, could really know what that means to people. So I don't just want to thank you a little, because you didn't have to do that stuff. And my feeling, just to echo Representative Cassidy, and you guys may not all know this, but we're 12 people at Restore Justice now, and 7 of us on my team have done significant amounts of time in IDOC. 6 of the people on my full-time staff, full half of my staff, have done more than 20 years in the IDOC, paid full-time staff. And over the past few weeks, when you talk about mental illness and you talk about lack of preparation, I think again, and I'm willing to write something, Kathy, as you asked Representative Cassidy to do, and I think it's important that we do, because there's a double-edged sword here with mental illness and trauma. It can't be used as a reason not to bring people home, but we cannot understate how bad it is. And that's a very difficult little needle to thread. I know, because I'm living it every day in my office. People having been deprived of resources and mental health care and actual regular old health care and being in solitary on and off for years for really fundamentally no reason, damages people. But that's also something that could be used as a reason to not bring them home. So I do want to make sure that the resentencing process that we talk about it's just a resentencing process, right? I mean, it's not a be all end all. It's not fixing the whole system. It's one piece of a puzzle. And we've got to, as Representative Cassidy said yesterday, stay clear on that. But I think the sensitivity with which you all in the leadership of this task force treated the group yesterday, I think we can apply that same level of sensitivity to this discrete report, if that makes any sense. And I'm again willing to throw myself into that gap in any way that I can. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lisa? Oops, I saw you, and yes, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Thank you. Finally, technical difficulties in the car. Thank you for being patient with me. I had an observation yesterday that I wanted to bring to the group, and excuse me, as everyone that knows me knows of my experience as a survivor of violent crime. And my belief system is in everything that I do and everything that I say. And that is that no one is the worst, the sum total of the worst thing that they've ever done or experienced. But as a survivor, there's something that always stands out for me, and that is the one voice. I understand that my perspective in the survivor space is different. And because of that, I've actually experienced an unwelcoming. On many occasions, my perspective has been unwelcomed in many spaces. The one thing that always stands out for me when I see things about the survivor community from the survivor community, representative of the survivor community, is that one voice. And oftentimes, because I understand that my voice is quite possibly of the minority in my belief system, that those who commit crimes, including the person who committed the crime against my son, is deserving of a second chance at life. It stands out for me when I'm in a space and the one voice of the survivor in that space, or even the many voices of the survivors in that space, is that voice of the contrary. And that voice is speaking for all survivors in the space. The voice of dissent, that people have the potential to be the worst thing that they've ever done. The person that did, that committed the crime against me or my family should go away and not be considered for resentencing, not be considered for any of the grace that is extended or that has the potential to be extended within the system. So all of that being said, the thing that stood out for me, basically because of my experience and my purview, was that on the panel yesterday, there was no voice that I heard that that spoke in opposition of this work that we are embarking upon. There was no one that I saw that could have, that was invited to be in the space, or had accepted an invitation to be in the space, to say, I don't agree with this. I don't want resentencing as an option for someone that harmed my loved one. And that stood out for me, again, because I've been in so many spaces where my voice or my belief system has been muted. And if we are embarking upon something that is fair and just, in this work of moving this resentencing agenda forward, I think it's important to, in all fairness, as we develop this report, to be able to say that there are some people, and we spoke to them, or we gave them an opportunity to speak to us, to say that they don't agree with this and this is why. I think that in all things that we should just be balanced. This task force is not made up of one body and one voice. We are many different people coming together from many different backgrounds, and we have many different opinions. And when the opinions differ, it shows up. We speak to that here, and I think that was why we were all brought together, because of our diversity in backgrounds and our diversity in experiences and our diversity of opinions. And I just think that I thought it would have been fair, maybe equitable, for someone who had a differing opinion just to simply be heard and have the opportunity to be heard. And again, in the final report, we can say that we did hear from someone who had a differing opinion, and this is what their opinion is, and we value that voice in the space. So I just wanted that's what stood out for me, and I'm confident that it stood out because of the seat that I sit in.
May I respond to that, Mr. Chair?
Actually, you may in a minute. And Lisa,
Okay.
I want to tell you I appreciate your comment. And as those who are trying to put together a witness list, I can tell you it's not always easy. And I will tell you that part of the perspective is that viewpoint is amply, loudly, and consistently represented through the voices of our state's attorneys. And so you're right, that was a lack in this particular context of that meeting. But the arguments that are against allowing resentencing, we have heard them across our meetings. They haven't come directly from victims, but that will be acknowledged in the report. So Kelly, do you want to respond specifically to that? Because you are not next in the queue, but if you are specific to that point, go ahead.
Specific to that. Yeah, and then you can remove me from the queue. I just wanted to acknowledge what Lisa talked about, and I was painfully aware of it as well. Pretty quickly in, and in fact, that first mistake I made when I called on the non-member to speak, it sounded to me like she was trying to represent the victim's voice when I shut her down in that moment, and I was very deliberate in making sure that in public comment we went to her. And then it turned out that she was not speaking from the victim's perspective. But I was texting with Kathy about it. Like, I think it's really important to get her voice in, because it did stand out to me as well, Lisa. And Kathy, you make an excellent point, that maybe that wasn't necessarily our goal to have a balanced meeting, but rather to hear from voices that are usually not heard from and hadn't been heard from in our prior testimony. And that's compelling as well, because that was thematic to the responses of most of the state's attorney side of things, was speaking to the speaking for victims. And Lisa, I acknowledge that's not necessarily sufficient. The direct voice is the most powerful voice. But I just wanted to acknowledge that and say that I did think I had a moment there where I could have balanced for it, but then I had misread her. So
I understood. Thank you.
Let me add something very quickly, and we can move on, hopefully. When we opened on yesterday, I indicated, or attempted to anyway, that the committee is comprised of what I would consider all the major stakeholders in the criminal justice system, to include victims' rights advocates, state's attorneys groups, and law enforcement. And I agree with you, Lisa, 100%. I always like to hear both sides of a situation. And we haven't had a lot of opposition, but we do have present on the committee representatives of groups that I truly expected would have some opposition to the resentencing process, specifically the victims' rights advocates and the state's attorneys and law enforcement. But instead, those people have acted as they have acted. And so maybe they're saying something in their silence. The fact that there isn't any verbal opposition. Maybe they're saying, I don't know. Mm-hmm. But I think that those factors, those elements were present in the constructed group, and we got what we got. So thank you, Kat.
Okay. I do not want to cut off anybody, but we have a half an hour left. And I would really like to hear other takeaways and other thoughts on including what we heard, finding a way to include what we heard in the report. And I'll say right now, what I'm playing around with is text boxes with excerpts from the testimony and excerpts from the letters that we are reading. So I'm going to go, if it's okay with everybody. Joby, I see you in the chat. Thank you for writing your comment. Next up in the queue is Shobha.
Everybody, good morning. And thank you for this thoughtful conversation, and many thanks for running the comments yesterday. Rep. Cassidy, I agree with everyone's comments about you facilitating that beautifully. The couple of reflections on a slightly different topic than what we've been talking about is I think it's been, and I actually want to just before even going to that, just want to thank Lisa, because I know I've watched you have to be that lone voice in many rooms, and your courage is inspiring, and I just want to say that out loud.
Thank
Uh,
you, Brenda.
you're welcome. And I think one point that I don't want us to lose is that, we've thought many times, I think, in this group, and we've known people even in this, on our task force, we're fortunate to know many people who have done amazing things with their time home after they have returned from prison as and from incarceration. But I don't want us to lose, and I'd like us to somehow capture in the report, I think it was Father Kelly who made the point about how bringing people home is also a violence prevention strategy, is a peace strategy. We heard from, several folks who told us how that was impacting their communities and young people to have the influence of people returning home. And the flip side of that being for the families who've had people go into the prison system, for them saying that they lost that influence, right? And so I want to make sure that we are capturing that point. And two other quick things. One, when we did hear from the survivor representatives and victim families, we heard, and Lisa has instructed on us on this many times, I think, that these long sentences are not promoting healing, and they are not actually holding people responsible. I think the person from CASE said that as well, and is not addressing their needs. And I know we've taken some pains in our deliberations to talk about that, and I just want to make sure that's also captured, that those needs are not being met with our current system and long sentences. And the final point I just wanted to add, which is not maybe transferable to a report so easily, Kathy, I apologize, but is more of just a reflection, which is what we heard from, I think, Xavier. And I've seen it many times in representing folks in these systems who, we've seen these examples through the tiny pilot programs we've had on resentencing, whether it be through Miller and other cases. But hope is complicated for people who are incarcerated, for their families, for those on the outside, for survivors, because it's not a guarantee and it leaves a lot of uncertainty. But even that, even hope being complicated, still means it is a powerful force, and that it can make people who are otherwise seeing no light at the end of the tunnel think about ways in which they can return to their communities in a positive manner. So I think one of the most powerful things we can do in this task force as we put forth these recommendations is recognize that we might be providing a pathway to clarity and to hope, because I appreciate what Representative Cassidy was saying about how the current system and the confusion around these, prosecutor initiatives, is not enough. As we all know, it's not providing clarity or a pathway that's something people can look to and work toward. And so I'm grateful we're doing this, and I hope that gets captured. So thanks to everyone on the task force for your hard work.
Thanks, Shova. Mitch Davis, your hand was up, but then it went down. But
It's still up.
okay, it's your turn.
Still up. So cute. It was a great event yesterday. Mr. Chair, your opening remarks were right on point. Rep, you all did a tremendous job of facilitating. And I want to say to Lisa that she's also a mind reader because her statements were exactly what I was going to say. Lisa, I am also that one voice. In law enforcement, I'm that one voice. So while there is law enforcement representation, if you ask my colleagues, some colleagues would beg to differ because I am that one voice who is oftentimes in dissension with those of my colleagues. And I was going to make the exact same point, is that those folks in opposition weren't there. But what I've for those, many of you already know this, but those who don't. I have learned, especially through this legislative process that just took place, that is a tactic in that if it's not what we want, then I'm not giving any input. I'd rather see it fail than to give input to something that I'm not in agreement with, and which is ludicrous to me, but that happens. And I found that to be true. So I don't know that was the case here, but it just seems awfully interesting that we got a lot of folks complaining about this process, and we're trying to be critical thinkers in what we do and making these recommendations. And being critical thinkers means that we've got to hear every perspective, because even though we might not be in agreement with things, everybody brings something to the table. So, I was very disappointed in that process. And like I said, Lisa, you made my point for me already. Thank you so much for doing so. And thank you all for the work that we're doing.
Okay, next in the queue, I think we have Cheryl.
Okay, good morning. Having been in a position of seeing something come out of the legislature that is impossible to implement, my takeaway from yesterday is whatever we send to them has to be something that we, or that they as judges, I keep forgetting I'm not one anymore, that they can implement. And I think, thanks to everyone on the committee, that in the very beginning, we definitely considered the voice of those people who feel they're not ready to move forward, and that the person who committed the crime against their family needs to be punished more. And I think we talked about that in terms of talking about at what point would we allow people to access whatever it is that we suggest. So we then moved to trying to make sure we didn't exclude anyone. But let me caution you, if you want the judges to act on the person who comes to court, then you can't give them an out to say there's another process available. So if this resentencing process is going to be different, and we started out talking about those people who had extremely long sentences and pretty much are locked up and forgotten about, then you have to give them a means to say, oh no, it's not available. If you do that, then they start to look at, if we look at all the young men who spoke yesterday, who started out or who received sentences from 13 to 17 years of age, for the most part, they're very young. A lot of things are going on, parents working, you're left to your own devices, whatever the case may be. Just the inability to make the right decision, the grass looks green on the other side, whatever it is. But they all served a long enough sentence to reach a point and a level of maturity where they were able to come out and become productive citizens. And the hope portion of it is very important, because if you have nothing to hope for, there's no reason to do any better. The fact that they could see or would know that, oh, at this point I can apply for this, gave them hope to improve themselves while in prison. So I think we have to definitely include that, as well as the impact they have to the community and the impact they've had to the community. I think that's pretty much it. I think, and again, I want to go back to the restorative justice portion of it. If we're going to talk about restorative justice for the families who may be willing to go through that process, then it has to be something that's offered before the person files the petition, complaint, motion, whatever we're going to call it. So if we can write that into whatever report it is, I think that would help. And I'm going to reiterate what you've heard me say a million times. I think you got to tell the legislature what you want, and then they can argue whatever they want to argue. But I think our opinions coming out of this committee need to be pretty strong about why we think A, B, C, and D should happen. Thank you. Thanks for allowing me to speak.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Next in the queue is Ari.
Thank you. And Judge Ingram, you'll always be a judge, so you can still say we, in my opinion. Lisa Daniels, I love you. Thank you so much for your comments earlier. I think they were just really well placed. And they go to one of the points that I want to make later on. But first, I will say that to the one of the most profound portions of the meeting yesterday was when we got to hear from system impacted people, men. And so I think each of those speakers had at least one strong nugget, for lack of a better phrase, that I think should be incorporated into the final report somehow, like just some quotable from as many of them as possible, because those firsthand experiences really are important. And I think that's how you get to really hone in on some of the more emotive side of things for this process. I also think highlighting those ages would be really powerful. For instance, I think it was Mr. Bay who said he went in at 13 and came out at 26. Someone went in at 17, came out at 45. I was in court yesterday afternoon, and one of the people that I heard speaking said he wasted his entire adulthood. He first became system involved when he was 17, spent about 20 years in and out of prison before he finally went to prison for 27 years. And at that point, he was 63 as of yesterday. And so he was not wrong in saying his entire adulthood was gone. And so I think highlighting those ages when someone first went in versus when they came out will really show, like, in numbers how important, how in some ways a whole life is lost when you send people away for those long sentences. And I think that may be helpful in some instance. My next point is that insofar as I did love hearing from system impacted men, therein lies the issue. It was men. I understand that in the Illinois Department of Corrections and in prisons across the country, there are far more men than women who are incarcerated. But between 1980 and 2020, the number of incarcerated women increased by 475%. And so I think we did a disservice to ourselves by not having the voice of at least one impacted woman be presented yesterday.
Let me break in, Ari. We had one, but she dropped out the day before the hearing. We were very conscious about that.
Okay, well, I'm glad to know that there had been at least one. And maybe that's more of a parity issue going forward. You try to get like multiples or something in the background. I don't know.
But we do have a lot of letters from women in our pile. We probably have about 2,000 letters, and we do have a lot from women.
That's great to know. I still think that having been able to hear that voice would have been helpful too, and it's unfortunate that that person was unable to speak yesterday. And to the point of just voices in general, and back to Lisa's earlier comment, not to belabor it, I know that for some, it may seem that they've had the voices of opposition to this process presented enough, or the voices of victims presented enough through members of this committee. But there's a difference between speaking for someone and allowing others to have the autonomy and the authority to speak for themselves. And so I do think that Lisa's point in having actual victims and victims advocates who would oppose this process would have been really helpful and more balanced. And to the idea that maybe we didn't want a balanced meeting, that's something with which I personally disagree. But I also note that this entire committee is comprised of the voices of advocates for victims on one hand, as Chief Davis said, but also for those who are incarcerated. Mr. Delaney, Joby, Shoba, Scott, I consider myself Switzerland and neutral in all of this, but at the same time, I think that it would certainly have been helpful just to give those folks that autonomy and that ability to speak for themselves in their own words, instead of simply saying, oh, well, that's why you have law enforcement as members of this task force. But overall, I think that yesterday, especially both the portion with the impacted individuals and the portion with the woman, unfortunately I blank on her name, who spoke so beautifully on having lost both of her sons, one to war and then the other to gun violence. So basically both to different types of gun violence was really powerful. And that moment when she spoke to the mother of the young man who'd murdered her son and said that she released her from that burden was just a really poignant moment for me. And so thank you for having included her and the impacted men.
Okay. Thank you. And I just, we are nearing our time to get to public comment. I don't know that we have many people on, but I just would like to say that in terms of fair and balanced, I do not think that we have been unbalanced in our discussions, and that will be reflected in the report. And I don't think that there is, I think what Cheryl said is spot on. We will also try and have some specifics that come out of our meetings and out of the materials. So, I will look to all of you in the time that you have to edit the report to make your feelings known on that point in particular. Yakov, you are up next, and then Representative Cassidy.
Thanks, everyone. Sorry again, I've been disconnecting here and there. I was commuting, but I'm finally stable. First, want to say thank you to Judge and Rep Cassidy for yesterday for facilitating and acknowledging the voices that was in the space yesterday. Lisa, I love you, greatly appreciate you and the work you do and the perspective that you bring into these spaces. I think I would, as for the report, I would want to emphasize the importance of accessing like restorative justice options for crime survivors to address, some of their needs that are usually not met through our current judicial process. I believe the task force provided a unique and meaningful platform yesterday, particularly for directly impacted people who testified and shared their experiences. But most importantly, because I talked with a couple of them yesterday, they felt heard. Most of these men have served over 20 years and was probably never provided like a platform such as that was provided yesterday. And a lot of times people want to be heard, so I think that was important. And I also agree with Ari, adding a quote from the system impacted person should be included in the report. It is definitely important to include voices of system impacted women as well. Joseph Moore definitely provided a statement about men and women are, and I may be misquoting, I'm paraphrasing, but I know he touched upon men and women. People aren't born with that propensity to go out and just commit harm against other folks, and so I would definitely recommend including some of the nuggets that the men provided when they were testifying. That's all I have to add for now.
Okay.
But appreciate you all providing space for system impacted people. I know I'm often talking about my own experience, but it's always good to, I think it's helpful and meaningful to uplift the experience and the stories and the testimonies of the hundreds of thousands of men and women who've experienced similar circumstances with long-term sentencing. Great.
Kelly, I think you are our last comment before we get to public comment.
Okay. And clearly there were some untreated wounds or something that festered that came out today. I don't want to belabor the point, but I do want to talk about how yesterday happened. We are all members of this task force. And we all have a responsibility to ensure that our task force process is robust. And as such, when I knew that we were planning a public hearing, I went back through my emails and sent Kathy all the people that had reached out to me for information on how the process works. And as I said in the chat, had I gotten emails from people who were opposed to the process because of their lived experience or just opposed to it generally, I would have shared those too. And we all have a responsibility to not be that lab partner. Not Monday morning quarterback after we get an F on the lab project. I don't think that we get an F on this lab project. I want to be really clear. I think we have heard a lot of voices. And would it have been better if we had had other voices represented, or if the voices that were represented checked more boxes? Yeah, but that's all of our responsibilities. That's what being on a task force is. That's what we were all brought in with all of our various backgrounds and expertise to make sure that our process is complete. And I'm frustrated hearing people say, why didn't we do X, Y, or Z? And I just need to get that out. Maybe I haven't had enough coffee. And that's what's making me more aggravated by this. But, we had ample notice that we were planning a public hearing. And I have regrets hearing these comments that I wasn't more intentional, that maybe we as a task force weren't more intentional, asking everybody to, letting everybody know what it means to be having a public hearing and what our role as task force members is in planning that. But I don't love the feeling that suggestion that Kathy and the SPAC team weren't dropped a ball somewhere, because that's not the case. I've been on a lot of task forces, and I've never been on one so well run, so thoughtfully executed, because that's what SPAC does. And if there were deficiencies in yesterday's hearing or in any of our processes, then we all own those together. I'm done.
Thank you. Chief Davis?
I just, I appreciate the rep's response there. And I just want to make it clear, and I don't know that it was my commentary, but I want to make it clear to this body that my comments were in no way anything criticizing anyone on this task force or the efforts of the task force yesterday. My commentary was challenging those that chose not to show up and share their comments in opposition. That was my commentary. So I don't, if I did not communicate it properly, I apologize. But that was why I was saying that was my disappointment, because I know that I'll be in meetings with my colleagues and they'll be complaining about this resentencing task force. They'll be complaining about what's going on, and I beg them to come out and share their opinions that don't necessarily agree with me. And I've done that since we've been involved in this stuff. And as you can see yesterday, they don't. They'll complain about it, they'll complain about it, but nobody wants to step up and give their input. So I just wanted to make sure that this body understood that I was in no way, my comments were geared to those who chose not to speak up and give their commentary.
Thank you.
And Clark, once again, the lengthy time that I could get back.
I don't know who just spoke, but we didn't hear you.
It was one of our
It was Lisa
consulting
on the
teams.
phone. She was
okay.
on an airplane.
Gotcha. We have a hand up for public comment and then Jovi. So Julie Anderson.
Thank you. My name is Julie Anderson, and I am actually on the staff at Restore Justice. For those who don't know me, I got involved with this. You heard from my daughter yesterday. My son, Eric Anderson, at the age of 15, was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. It was 27 years ago. And for decades, I have lived with this shame and guilt hanging over me. And I just want to say yesterday's hearing was very moving for me, because for anyone who says we didn't hear from other people, I have heard from the other side over and over. It was really difficult for every single one of those people to testify, and it may not have looked that way to you. They may have looked like they got up and were like, we need a second chance. But people are desperate, and telling your story and admitting, like talking about the very worst things that ever happened in your life is really, really hard. And I will counter that victims advocates, survivors advocates have a very clear voice. When my son was resentenced, the state's attorneys had a very loud, clear voice, the one that counted, the one that always counts. And so when I heard the hearing yesterday and the fact that we were looking at this side that doesn't often get heard, I was really moved. So I just wanted to put that out there as I've heard this conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. And thanks to Eric for his work with Kiwani Horizons. Joby?
I'll be brief. I put most of my comment in the chat, but I think something needs to be explicitly said here. There's a performance to all of this, and we are all participating in that performance right now. But what you heard from Lisa earlier, from Julie, is not a performance. That's the lives that they've lived on these stages, these fora, where telling your story and being heard is part of the playing out of a public debate. I don't think I can say strongly enough that if anyone has a critique of this process, it's welcome. And I appreciate your point in the chat. Critique is always welcome to anybody, to any of us. But I will note that ignoring the power differential, ignoring the true power differential historically and at the present moment between law enforcement and everybody else, we ignore that power differential at our peril. There has never, not once, not one time in the 15 years I've been doing this, and going back in my research, not in the 40 years since the state of Illinois abolished parole, not one time has there been a legitimate government-sponsored forum where this side of the story got told. In 40 years. Not one institution of government has told this story, not once. So we're going to tell this story, and we're not ignoring. But if you look at that hour yesterday, or 2 hours yesterday, or you look at the past 6 weeks or the past 3 months in a vacuum, sure, it's fine. But that's not the reality that most of us are living in. That's not the world we're living in.
Okay, do we have any other public comment? I am not seeing hands. John Jacobson, would you like to speak? Because your comment got a little cut off in the chat. I guess he does not want to speak, but okay. Is there anybody else who would like to make public comment? I don't see any other hands. So it's time to move on and talk a little bit about the next steps. I think we've talked about this before in terms of writing the report, and that has been in process now for a couple of weeks, probably about a month. It will be laid out to put the recommendations that we've adopted and offer a rationale that draws on, as I said earlier, the discussions that we've had in the meetings, as well as the materials that have been presented and the information now from the public hearing. That information might be incorporated in an actual section where we had enough testimony in the hearing to relate directly to one of the recommendations. We might just include a section indicating public hearing testimony and the themes that emerged. We will get this to you. I don't remember the exact date. Susan Lloyd, tell me if you have our internal timeline, but we're going to be getting it to you and giving you about eight to 10 days to respond. And that will be for you to respond more to the substance of the rationale. We are not going to be re-editing recommendations that we already voted on unless there is some very strong statement from the majority, if not all members, that it needs to get done. And then we will have our final meeting in December to vote on adopting the report. And I don't know how you actually bring an end to a task force like this, but maybe a vote to disband the task force so we have an official record. And the report will be published. I think this is a report that I wish I could say will be graphically designed and professionally printed, but having dealt with the CMS print shop, I can tell you that would delay the report by at least 6 months. So it will not have that special treatment, but my intention is to work with LaToya to make sure that it gets distributed within the facilities. We will blast it out to all of the SPAC distribution list, and it will be available on our website. In addition, under government records provisions, 26 hard copies will be delivered to the Illinois State Library, as well as electronic document deposit. So that's kind of our timeline. And I would just say, along the lines of some of the comments, if there's anything in particular that you want to assure gets to specific mention in that report, you need to let me know. I am going back. I am looking at the recordings of the meetings. We're actually probably going to get a transcript done of the public hearing yesterday so that it's easier to search, to be able to connect the dots between our policy and the testimonies that we've heard. And I hope that what results is a report that's actually usable. Part of what jumped out at me yesterday in hearing from both those who spent time in prison and the incarcerated is that there are some very strong requirements of our system that are antithetical to public safety. One of which is prohibiting contact between victims and perpetrators. One of which is the security concerns around community being built up in our prisons. We have a lot of work to do in a system that embeds harshness and retribution over the things that many of you have talked about in the course of these task force meetings. So that is my update. And I just want to thank you all, because over the course of this time, you have all been really, really great at attending meetings and speaking up. So I think, Lisa, you are on to do the final takeaway part of this meeting. Or maybe not.
No, I'm actually at an airport. I'm sorry, but Debbie, can you close it out?
You know what? It's way too noisy. So let's just go to a motion. Or Mr. Chairman, do you have any closing comments?
I'd like to thank staff, done an excellent job. The comments and observations are heartfelt and will be taken under consideration, I'm sure. And we look forward to the members of the committee getting to you the takeaways from yesterday, getting those to you in writing at their earliest convenience. And with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved in second. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathy. Thanks for your
Thanks,
leadership,
everybody.
Kathy. Appreciate you all.